we are so divided.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the political landscape now in the Philippines?
40 days is both long and short. It could win an election. It can. So there's some for the people who still want to catch up.
Do you think it's still possible?
It's still possible.
Good evening, everyone. I am Equivias, and welcome back to the Tuesday sessions, where we invite esteemed guests from different industries and talk about interesting topics we feel everyone would enjoy. And tonight, my guest is a renowned political economic advisor. He's the founder of WNR, Public Affairs Advisory Firm. He's the president and CEO of WR Numero Research, a tech-driven public opinion research firm. He's also a professor of political economy in UANP. He has a PhD in international politics from Prudent University in Shanghai and has a Master of Public Administration from my alma mater, University of the Philippines, Diliman. He's a good friend and a JCI Manila brother. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Robin Garcia.
Thank you,
Hello,
President.
Robin.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Of
So
course.
good
Of
to
course.
see you.
Of course. Of course.
And I'm sure at this time you're very busy with all that is happening in the world and in the Philippines.
We're trying to be sane. We're trying to be sane and relevant as well.
I'm sure you are very relevant right now and in demand.
Well,
Yeah. And we've got a lot of ground to cover. Why
sure.
don't we shoot right
Let's
at
do
that
that.
already?
Let's do that. Let's do that.
The main headline for the last month, or more than a month now, right,
Right.
is the Russia and Ukraine war. The thing that baffles me is why is this happening in the first place at this day and age, Robin?
Right. I mean, it's always a question of so many people, including the Philippines, even if it's not very close to us, but actually the implications is so much more profound than what our own policymakers think.
Definitely.
Well, the first thing, the reason why this is happening is one would be Russia has this revivalist ambition, right? So it has always had that revivalist ambition, regardless of whether it's Putin or somebody else. So Russia has always wanted to revive the glory days of the USSR. When, during the time that at the height of its power, of course, was the Cold War, where it was really about the US and Russia fighting each other, for influence in terms of economic models, communism versus capitalism, democracy versus autocracy. And at one point, of course, we know that it was such an influential ideology, the Russian model of governance and development, that in fact it influenced even so many Southeast Asian countries, such as Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar, and so many, and Cambodia, exactly. So those countries that near the border of China, and even China itself, right, was in the sphere of influence of Russia. So it's trying to revive that kind of power, influence in the world. And the reason why it's happening now, and not a decade ago or maybe a decade from now, the reason why it's happening now is because Putin sees the US as weak. And this was, in fact, one of the things that President Trump has been saying, has been warning everyone during the time that they were having elections in November 2020, that Biden is weak in terms of international affairs. So Putin thinks that Biden is, is not as strong as the other leaders, and it's distracted. Like, it has so many things that it's doing. And that's why I actually want to segue to that. Philippine policymakers think this issue is just an issue of repatriation of OFWs. It's not. It's not, because if the US is distracted, then its resources spread too thinly to Eastern Europe. What happens is that the Southeast Asian countries will have less attention from the US, and China might find this see this as an opportunity to do something, right? So In fact, I think President Duterte said something similar, that they have reported. I mean, there were intelligence reports, something to akin to this kind of opportunism of China. So I think it's not just simply an OFW issue, that there are 300 OFWs or less or more or less in Ukraine. It's more than that.
Yeah, it's definitely more than that. I think the effect is really connected globally.
Exactly.
With
Exactly.
China and the US playing very significant roles in this.
Exactly.
But what about the NATO angle?
Right. Right. Correct.
There's much talk.
Discussion, yes.
Discussion about NATO.
Right. Right.
Ukraine being
Correct.
asking to be a part of NATO.
Correct.
This led to Putin's.
Correct. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was precisely created to counter Russian power in the 1940s, 1950s, right? So, and for the longest time, you're absolutely right. Ukraine has been wanting to be part of NATO. The irony is NATO has consistently said no to Ukraine because NATO mistrusts Ukraine. It thinks that the NATO member states think that Ukraine is really in the sphere of influence of Russia. So
That might be a sleeper country here.
exactly, and then now NATO is found out that, oh my God, like we should have accepted them a long time ago. But anyway, in terms of NATO as well, Russia and Putin is coming from a place of insecurity. Because NATO has expanded its reach towards Eastern Europe. The traditionally USS Russia-dominated countries is already part of Europe and of NATO rather, and it thinks that Ukraine, might really slip into the Western side instead of because Ukraine is a democracy and Zelensky is a pro-Western leader. At least that's what Putin thinks. So insecurity and ambition are the two things that really led to this.
Do you think that if it's not Putin, do you think this war in Ukraine would happen at all, or
So
a lot plays into how he is really as a character and all that he's gone through in this in the Russian political landscape?
definitely Putin's egoism has a lot of things to do with it, as we were saying.
Has these videos of himself,
Correct.
pictures of
Riding a horse,
Riding a horse.
without a shirt, and in the Russian countryside. So definitely Putin. But there are a lot of people sympathetic to Putin actually within the Russian elites and then within the Russian society who support the war. Of course, there are some people who do not support the war, and one of those people is Navalny, is a very fierce opposition leader who Putin, has been trying to take down. And if it would have been Navalny who won the election in Russia, that's always been rigged, by the way. That's expected. We could have seen a different, maybe a world, a different Russia. But you're right, definitely Putin's own perspective really got us here.
Now we're into more than a month into the war, I think.
Correct.
Right? It started in the last Feb 20s.
Correct.
At the end point of February. And do you see any end in sight for what's happening now?
I think the last 2 days, there were reports coming in that Russia has withdrawn from Kyiv, the capital. So I think that's a big win for Ukrainians. But of course, it's not as simple as that. The Battle of Kyiv might have been won by Ukrainians, by Zelensky, but I'm sure there's a pivot to somewhere else. I think the outskirts of Ukraine, with the borders that they share with Russia, has already been occupied.
I think the eastern border of Ukraine is pretty much controlled by Russia now.
Exactly.
Right, and I think more of the refugees and all the people of the Ukrainians have fled to the western part near the NATO ally countries.
Yes.
Yeah, and but there's another facet of this war that is really interesting also, which are the sanctions.
Correct.
Given by made
Correct.
by the U.S. and the NATO countries.
Correct.
Are these sanctions? Do you think they're working at all?
Right. Sanctions, Western sanctions, are always significant. It will definitely hurt the economic interests of Russia, the Russian elites, different industries like oil, mining, different extractive industries.
There's so much pressure now in those industries or the Russian oligarchs to to let Putin end this, or do they have so much to gain if they actually win this war and get Ukraine to be a part of Russia again?
I think it will take some time before the Russian elites feel this. They've prepared for this. I think they've stocked up on cash or whatever stuff. I mean, right? Especially supporters of Putin. They know that this is coming. They know that Putin is gonna do this. But another factor would be China.
How does China come into this?
China will be a caution against. So there might be a pivot to China. So China might, even if it doesn't take sides like publicly, China might it's already to the rescue of all the economic fallout that's happening in Russia.
Yeah,
I mean, wars are expensive, of course, diba? So
yeah, I think because Russia being one of the major oil producers,
Correct.
and
Correct.
I think a lot of the demand has been shifted
Correct.
to China
correct,
to allow them to, still
correct.
do their oil business.
And
right?
to other countries, India is another
There's this
country.
intriguing
Question.
There's this question in my head that I don't want to ask, but because
But you want to ask.
But you brought China into the conversation, and there's so much fear that China might use the same reasoning or purpose of Russia with respect to its other
Claims, yeah.
claim states and territories. Are we seeing? Is it even possible?
I think it's possible.
Oh my.
I think it's possible. Taiwan is on its toes. It's on red alert. It's the same reason why. I mean, the reason that I told you earlier why we should be wary of China and other countries.
Yeah.
It's the same reason that Taiwan is currently on its toes. So.
So close to us.
Taiwan is very close to us.
Kilometers away.
Very close to us. Although I think China is more tempered.
Right. What do you mean?
It's quite different. I mean, both of them are ambitious. Russia and China are really ambitious. It's been wanting to shift the structure of power towards them for the longest time over the last few decades.
Yeah.
But at the same time, China knows that it has a lot to lose when it really starts a war. And the basis for its economic growth is actually integration into the world economy.
Right.
So if they do run the risk of, if they go to war with any country, they run the risk of a big economic fallout. So they're a little bit more cautious, I think, from a strategic perspective.
So much discussed with this.
There's a lot of things to discuss.
We can go on and on.
Definitely.
There's another part of our discussion that I want to go to, but the last question with respect to this topic: what's in store for the Philippines? Or I mean, how should the Philippines act given all that's happening right now? What should we prepare for, or should we be an active participant in this
Yes,
happening?
yes. I think it's good that we're not taking sides. That's a big plus. If we're going to be drawn into the war, if we take the side of the U.S., then that's disastrous for us.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to really really observe very well and plan properly what are the possible scenarios for Filipinos. Probably the security establishment, the armed force of the Philippines has already been thinking about this. I hope they continue to think about this.
Right.
Right now, that's the only thing we can do.
Wow. That was a very meaty conversation.
Thank you. Yeah.
This
Good questions.
Yeah.
Good questions.
Well, it's a very fascinating thing.
It is.
It's actually, I really believe that we are affected. I mean, we're feeling the economic
Right.
repercussions now because
Right.
of the rise in oil price.
Exactly.
I think
Exactly.
that's just one, but I'm quite fearful that many others would arrive now. So
Right.
anyway, thank you. So much to discuss, but we have to shift now to
Still very, very political, right?
very political situation in the local scene. We are going to have our elections, the presidential elections, and all the other local elections in the next how many days? Maybe less than 40 days, I think. And we are so divided.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? What's
I
happening in
mean,
the political landscape now in the Philippines?
40 days is both long and short.
Long and short.
It could win an election. It can. So there's some for the people who still want to catch up.
You think it's still possible?
It's still
given,
possible. It's theoretically possible, of course, but if you do the right things, right? If you communicate the right things to your voters, but you really have to be strategic. You have to use the power of data, right? You have to use data, essentially.
Right.
But I think for the longest time we haven't seen a presidential candidate who've reached the 50% mark in the pre-election surveys.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's a watershed moment in Philippine politics since we instituted a multi-party system.
Right.
And multi-presidential candidate system. So the numbers of Bongbong Marcos is something that's unique, something that's unique and something to be studied actually by academics and political scientists. But what I'd say is it's still possible for Vice President Leni Robredo to catch up. Possible for even the others like Mayor Isko Moreno, Senator Manny Pacquiao, Senator Ping Lacson to
It's
catch
still
up.
possible for the other candidates?
It's still possible. So a lot of the pre-election surveys, they only give you the first choice preference, but behind those numbers are several things. One would be, how many soft or hard voters do you really have?
Soft and hard voters.
So how many? So I mean, it's possible for all the soft voters to shift to even on election day, which is not being captured by the polls published recently.
Right.
It's possible for the 10% or 5 to 10% undecideds to consolidate towards the others. And
it's happening. I think it's happening right now.
it is.
There's so much. The supporters and the volunteers of the other candidates are actually expressing their
Right. So
support. No.
you see the intensity of the supporters of Vice President Leni, and that's expected, I think.
Yeah. As the second.
Because there's a lot of catching up to do, and we're also seeing a very strong narrative from Marcos, actually. I think that's captured the imaginations of so many Filipinos. And of course, the Marcos nostalgia is what it is, right? It's a infrastructure.
Do you think this is a little bit a juicy question, but do you think the campaign has started really years back with all of the works that were being done in the tech sphere in social media
I understand.
I think I've read some reports that there are a lot of I don't know if it's proper to say
interventions
or that quite tells a different story
right
to the
we know that the presidential ambition of Senator Bongbong Marcos started really in 2010 when they were able to pierce through the national veil again and gained influence. And that was actually quite important to note that Bongbong Marcos won the same year that Noynoy Aquino won as president.
Right.
So it means that he really has a following in 2010. So they definitely this whole journey until 2022 started 2010. But as to whether they've started a targeted presidential campaign in 2010, I'm not sure. But I'm sure that they're ambitious and that they've started to think about 2016 to 2022 and even further. But they're also very lucky. They came in at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
You know that there were a lot of negotiations between Sara Duterte and Bongbong Marcos in last year. We didn't know who was going to run, but what happened was they consolidated their votes, their base, and the opposition was splintered into 4.
Right.
And they were supposed to, if there's anyone who should unite, it should be the opposition, right? It should be Leni, Isko, Manny, and Ping, right? But of course that fell through, and now we see splintering.
Now that you brought Mayor Sara into the conversation,
right?
Were you able to foresee that they would really do this, like go in tandem and?
That has always been a possibility. We know that one of the first moves of President Duterte in the first half of his presidency was the Marcos burial.
Right.
So there was a lot of respect from President Duterte towards the Marcos family in the supposed legacy of the Marcoses. So I guess, zooming into now, we can see that affinity still exists.
Right.
And but so if there's any inclination for Duterte to support Marcos, it was already there like before. But now, it just happened that they did form a strong coalition.
Yeah. It's very interesting how
It is.
everything developed. We initially thought that actually Sarah would run. That was and then suddenly there was just this unified team. But what's fascinating is that President Duterte has been giving off mixed signals about Bongbong, he didn't mention, but it's quite it's easy to understand who he's referring to. But do you think he has the presidential support? He has.
Not yet.
Not yet.
President Duterte said he's not publicly
supporting. Come out.
To support.
If we're nearing the
Bongbong.
elections.
It's possible.
Likely or just possible?
It's possible. I don't know if it's likely. To be honest, I really don't know where this whole issue with Bongbong and President Duterte really comes from. Maybe we should ask other people.
Yeah. But do you think all that's happening, we seem very divided in all. What will be the implications, the consequences of having this very diverse political landscape in the country right now? Do you think, even if, for example, Senator Bongbong wins, do you think we will have a unified Philippines?
I don't think so. I think we'll have a very polarized society.
Polarized.
So a lot of people will think that this is a revival of authoritarianism that started, well, at least during President Duterte's administration. A lot of people think that was already an autocratic. Duterte had autocratic tendencies. So, so people who did not support President Duterte might also not support Bongbong Marcos, but it also depends on what Bongbong Marcos will do. It's quite possible that Bongbong Marcos will not be we'll just be an average president. He'll just cruise through the next 6 years, and there's nothing phenomenal about what he's gonna do. So,
and maybe the fears of having the authoritarian rule.
Might not even be.
Might happen. Right?
Might not happen, or might happen.
All of the checks now and the system that we have.
Correct.
Probably it won't even be possible.
Correct.
But should we still be hopeful for the country?
I think we should. There's still a lot of. You don't have to be president to help.
To do your part.
So, like JCI Manila, we're doing our part, doing these discussions, doing these projects for communities. So, that's something that we can do.
Yeah. Well, wow, Professor.
Of course.
My friend Robin, that was one wealth of information and discussion. I could go on and on actually, but that's all the time we have. I think.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity.
We should have another interview.
We should.
With Robin and see where this war would actually go. No?
Yeah.
In the next few days or months.
We should.
Yeah. But before we end this episode, we would like to show you one of JCI Manila's projects.
Thank you for the board of directors for believing in this project. Salamat for all the members of the committee. Welcome to Atin ang Kinabukasan 2022, a National Voters Engagement Symposium for the youth. We at JCI Manila believe that young people should be empowered to create positive change in society for a better world. This ambitious project is a product of the collective effort of almost 100 institutions. Today, we come together on common ground, united as young Filipino voters. We are JCI Manila, and let's rebuild the future with enlightened minds and empowered hearts.
And today's event in Atin ang Kinabukasan. Our aim is to educate and empower youth voters, both in the Philippines and also all the Filipino youths around the world. We are empowering you and educating all the youths on how to exercise your right to vote and how to discern your candidates, but also how to utilize and become an active citizen in also the election.
Matagal na namin inaantay yung ganitong klaseng diskusyon, lalo na puro social media tayo ngayon, nasa digital ang ating paghahayag ng mga opinion. Pero mas maganda kasi kung lumabas tayo sa ating comfort zone and actually talk to each other and engage with people to bring out and talk about issues that are relevant in today's age.
Pinag-usapan dito yung value ng bawat isang boto ng mga kabataan, ano yung value ng mga laws natin as regards sa election, at paano natin mas gagawin na maging matalino yung pagboto natin.
I encourage everyone to continue learning and go through the process of learning, unlearning, and relearning. This is an important process of engagement during elections and even beyond elections.
Everyone learned a lot today, but more important, we the youth have it in ourselves to rebuild ourselves, rebuild our country, and ultimately rebuild the future.
Well, tonight was a very insightful and interesting conversation and discussion with my very good friend, Professor Robin.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very
Press
much
job.
for being here.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So, we'd like to thank our sponsors and our partners for this episode tonight. Madcap Productions, Honda Greenhills, ContractWorld Furniture, Hanako Japanese Restaurant, WNR and its affiliate firm, WR Numero Research. And that's it for tonight. This is Joaquin once again. Join us next time for another episode of the Tuesday Sessions.